All right, welcome to another Small Business Pivots. Today we have another special guest from around the world, and I know only the business owner can introduce themselves and their company like they can. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you and your company.
Good deal. I'm Jim Heininger from Chicago, and I lead the Rebranding Experts, which is a very specialized agency that focuses on helping organizations or businesses that need to go through a brand transformation from a beginning to end kind of process to be able to achieve the phenomenal outcomes that rebranding can help bring an organization.
Wow, I know a lot of businesses could use that because I know just driving down the street from time to time, I'll see a vehicle and I'm going, okay, I don't even know what you do. Like that was a waste of a car wrap because
Yep,
you
yep.
just put your name and it doesn't even make sense. So yeah, this will be good. So listeners, buckle up. We're going to introduce the show real quick and we'll be right back. Welcome to Small Business Pivots, a podcast produced for small business owners. I'm your host, Michael Morrison, founder and CEO of Boss, where we make business ownership simplified for success. Our business is helping yours grow. Boss offers business loans with business coaching support. Apply in minutes and get approved and funded in as little as 24 to 48 hours at businessownershipsimplified.com. Jim, I know a lot of our small business owners have gone through trials and tribulations from time to time in their life. I know most of our listeners know by now that I was an introvert, had to overcome that. Anything like that you went through? Because I know a lot of business owners learn from other business owners and how you
Boy.
maybe overcame it.
Yeah, I think it's the lesson of perseverance. So, as long a career as I've had, there are ups and downs. There are times when perhaps I was in an organization, working with an organization where you said, "This just isn't right. This just isn't working out right." And the kind of strength to be able to say that and say, "I think we need to take a time out. It's better for both of us, to move on in different directions." So that's probably the thing that several times in my career have had
Yeah.
the opportunity to experience.
Wow. Yeah. There are a lot of people stuck. And I know even some of our listeners are not quite business owners yet. They're what I call entrepreneur wannabes. They've been thinking about this for years and they're just stuck. So perseverance and, being able to move on and get uncomfortable is a big thing. Anything that maybe helped you kind of overcome that and pull the trigger?
It really comes down to that confidence in your core, and believing in yourself. And, if something doesn't feel right for you, then there's probably it's your gut's telling you something. Listen to it.
Yeah.
So I think it's that ability to you all know what it feels like when things are working well. So when something's not working well, then it feels different, and really kind of diving in, questioning yourself, asking all the things, getting to the heart of it, and then being able to communicate that to whoever your business partner is, your client, your customer, and be able to say, this is how I feel. How are you feeling? And usually it's a mutual kind of agreement then that let's move forward in different directions.
Wow, that's powerful and very helpful. You mentioned something, communicate, and I know with branding, that's really what it is communicating who you are, what you do, that all kinds of good stuff. And the vehicles I was kind of mentioning earlier literally have the faces of the owner on the trucks. I've seen these trucks around, so they probably have maybe a dozen of the box trucks. I know who the owners are because they're very clear on the side of the vehicle with the company name, but I can't find what they do. So communication is big in the branding world. So we're going to help a lot of people. So with you being the expert in this, is there a particular place you want to start? Do you want to start from start to end, or are there places where do you want to go with this to help?
Well, and I think let's just start out with, well, what is branding, and what does it mean? Because if you're going to rebrand, that means you're going to start anew. You're going to build a new brand. So what is that brand in the very beginning? And I always like to encourage people to think of, it's not your name, it's not your logo. the brand is the total set of experiences that a customer has with your organization. So it could be a name that's good or not. It could be the trucks they see rolling down the street with your image on them and so forth. It could be when you hire them, what's the experience like? How do you relate to the customer? When the customer has a problem, how is it dealt with? All those things feed into that bigger picture of what your brand is. And I always encourage people to remember, you try to control the brand for your company. You try to position it the way you want it to and communicate it the way you want it to. But at the end of the day, the brand sits in the customer's mind. And that's where it really, how you see that it's all those experiences, everything rolled in together. And do they have a favorable impression of your brand or a negative one? So are they going to choose to do business with you again in the future? Or are they going to choose to go to a competitor? So keep that in mind when you're thinking about branding, because branding is all about differentiating. It's all about making sure that people understand what is unique about you, about your company, about the service that you offer, and how it's better or a better match than what your competitors are offering. So brand sits in the mind, and branding is about differentiation so that you can really make sure to embed it in everything that you do. So that's kind of the starting point. So then if you think of rebranding, which is what we specialize in, that's when you realize the brand I have is not doing as good a job for me as it should. It's not working hard enough. It's perhaps anchoring me to perceptions of my my business that I don't want people thinking about anymore. Maybe you've grown beyond the original service that you offered, or your products are available, in new outlets or new services that they were in the past. Or maybe you've grown geographically, and so you've got a brand that's very centric to a geographic locale where you started, but now that's kind of an anchor. It's weighing you down. And you want to look at the option of rebranding, which would mean standing up an entirely new brand for the organization that is much more forward facing, that totally encompasses all the work that you do now, and maybe what you may add to your services in the future as well. Maybe it defines a bigger customer group than you originally had. And so it kind of untethers you from the past and allows you to move forward aggressively in the future.
So I hear a lot of people say they're rebranding, but from what you're saying, they're not really rebranding because they got a new logo. They say, well, I'm
Yeah.
getting my logo redesigned, and that's not what you're talking about, is it?
No, no.
Okay.
Let me break out kind of three levels of the way we think about it, because these are all very viable strategies that you can pursue. And then rebranding will be the last example, which is the more comprehensive one. So organizations all the time will refresh their brand, and a brand refresh is really more of a visual makeover of your brand to make it look fresher, more modern, attract some news and excitement to your brand. So that might mean changing your logo, updating your logo. It might mean a new website that's got a new color palette, and maybe some new messaging. But it's really more visually oriented to bring a new level of excitement to your brand. We see those all the time. Sports teams constantly are changing kind of their merchandise, at the start of a new season to make it look more exciting and to sell a lot more of the new stuff than they did in the past. So we see brand refreshes all the time. The next step up from that is when you would reposition your brand. And that would be where you recognize that the way you're being perceived is too limiting, and it doesn't reflect fully the direction that you're wanting to go in terms of the products that you're offering, the services that you're offering. So you would define a new customer audience. You would kind of update your brand promise to be more reflective and more inclusive of the new markets you're going to, the new geographic areas that maybe you're wanting to expand into. We see brand repositionings all the time in the retail marketplace. So some very visible ones that everybody's probably, has seen some evidence of is Victoria's Secret. So 3-4 years ago, they said, okay, everybody's perceiving us as being the models on the runway shows and so forth. and that wasn't very inclusive of a whole huge segment of women who were of different body shapes and sizes that weren't buying their products in the past because they were perceived as being that, that perfect runway model kind of look. So they changed the sizings, they changed the styles of some of their products and so forth to be more inclusive, and they started to use other spokespeople that were representative of that inclusivity. Even Megan Rapinoe, the soccer star, who's lesbian, who is trying to impress her man, kind of in what lingerie she's wearing. It was a whole way to open up a new marketplace by repositioning themselves that way. Now, it's still kind of in play, and it's still working 3 or 4 years later, and they're still tinkering with that brand repositioning, because some ways it hasn't worked, some ways that they're still trying to fix it, so to speak. Another retail brand repositioning was Abercrombie and Fitch. Once again, they used all those sexy models of young teenagers, or the boys with their shirts off, ripped abs, all that kind of stuff. And a lot of people weren't buying their products because they said, that's not me. I don't see myself in that brand. So they changed the products, they changed the marketing, and were able to be more inclusive and bring in new customers that they previously weren't able to capture. Again, both of those examples are all about growth. It's all about how are we going to strategically grow our brand and our business. Repositioning was the answer there. Then on top of that, you have rebranding, which is when you're standing up an entirely new brand. As the prefix means to start anew. So you're not tinkering with what you have as much as what you are recreating an entirely new brand. And this is where you would change the name of your organization as well, too, to better portray to your customers what you do for them, what is the outcome of having an experience with your brand. And then you would also add to that the repositioning and the refreshing. So it's the total package, much more comprehensive kind of effort. And you don't see this as often because it's a heavier lift and a heavier investment for a business to do. And you have to do it right, because you have to make sure that it's built upon your past and the equities of your current brand, but define yourself in a new way that customers are going to say, I love it. And new customers are going to say, I want to be a part of that. So when we look at rebranding, some of the examples that we see a lot, oftentimes they come from mergers or acquisitions, where you've got two companies that are coming together and you're having to make some brand decisions. And sometimes you say, we're going to go with the bigger brand, the more well-known brand, or sometimes people say, we're going to create an entirely new brand that encompasses both companies that have, come as part of this merger or this acquisition. The one that people probably identify with most in recent years is the introduction of Meta as being the parent company.
First thing that I thought of.
Yeah, of Facebook. So if you look at that situation, Facebook was clearly defined as a social media platform, and it was carrying a lot of baggage. This is back in the days when people were criticizing Facebook a lot, that it was exposing young people to things they shouldn't be seeing. It had some ulterior motives that people didn't like. And they strategically wanted to grow their business into that whole kind of virtual reality space, and said, this is more than Facebook. This is a whole new business venture that we're wanting to introduce. And we want to own it from the beginning. So we want to coin a term, the metaverse, which they could own, and then a brand name which put them out in front of anybody else that was in this market. So they introduced Meta as their corporate brand name. So not replacing Facebook, but to be the bigger brand name, so that they could then more easily progress their virtual reality business lines. And it left behind Facebook and the baggage that it was carrying, and it didn't taint Meta then. They kind of cleared a nice clean space for them to be able to go into that new Meta universe and their products there. Now, is it being successful is always a question people are going to talk about. It left behind Facebook to do its own business. How successful they've been in the virtual reality thing, a lot of different analysts with different opinions on it, but a clear example on how, if you are stuck, or if you have a brand that doesn't necessarily answer what you're wanting to do in terms of your strategic growth, then a rebrand might be the answer to enable you to do that.
You talked about a comprehensive approach to rebranding. And we've worked as a business coach, we've worked alongside with some businesses that rebranded and they were completely different experiences, because I guess everyone kind of has their own
It's different.
point of view of how it should be done. But from your lens, how long does that comprehensive approach look like? Like, what do you do? For instance, one of our clients, they did a deep dive into everything, market space, everything. And the other one, not quite so much. So, on your opinion, kind of what does that look like so a company knows what to expect when you say comprehensive?
Yeah, and so we've got a 4-step process that we follow that big or small, or how aggressive they want to get into the effort, there's still pieces of it that you need to do. And the first step of that is really it's assessing your current brand. So what is your current business? What does that brand stand for? How do your customers perceive it? What attributes do they give to the brand and so forth? So that you know where you're starting from. And oftentimes companies will do a great deal of research to determine how much flexibility customers will give them to change the brand, or whether they need to rebrand. So can we reposition it, or do we need to rebrand to be able to achieve our business objectives here? The second step then, and so that's where some companies will do a lot of research to have a very clear understanding of that. Others will say, you know what, I got a gut feel for what it's like. I might not have the resources to do all that research. I think I know where we need to go, and it's based upon anecdotal conversations with customers and so forth. So let's move forward. That second step then is defining the new brand. So it's saying, what equities do we want to pull forward? What are the things that people very proudly say about our brand that need to continue? But then how do we define the new one? What are our business interests? Where do we want to go? What new promise do we want to offer customers? What does that strategic plan say about what our growth planks are going to be in terms of introducing a new product or a new service or growing into new geographic markets? And then defining that new brand. And so that starts with that promise and what is our unique value proposition going to be to our customers. And then from that, you create a name that defines the new brand and illustrates what you're wanting to achieve. Then it's the new logo, the visual identity, the customer experience. How is that going to change as a part of this rebranding? What are we going to ask our employees to do that they haven't done in the past? And then what's that employee experience going to be? So you kind of stand up that whole new brand, as in step 2. Step 3 is all the work that goes on behind the scenes to align everything within your organization before you go public, before you tell anybody. So that's oftentimes training of employees. It's setting up new systems to be able to create a different customer experience. It's updating the website and having all the new materials produced that are going to show your new brand, your new marketing for, when you go to launch. That's all in that alignment stage. And then the fourth step and final step is going to market, launching it out internally first to make sure that your customers are all, or your employees are all on board, and then introducing it to your customers. And then what is the next year going to look like in terms of how you're going to market that new brand to your customers? Sometimes, I would say on average, this is about an 18-month experience. We have a lot of clients that are trying to condense it down to 9 months, which is a tight turnaround, but it can be done because everybody's impatient these days, and they want to realize the value of the rebranding, as quickly as possible. So dependent upon how much you invest in time and energy up front is really a big determinant in terms of how long it takes for the whole process.
If done well, a rebrand, what would you say the return on investment looks like for a company?
So a lot of the research that's been done among business executives that have rebranded their organizations, it's 80+% say there was a return on the value that were perceived differently in the marketplace, which allows us to do business in a different way and to grow. Again, it's all about growth. And employees that are engaged in the new brand and believe that there's something different about the organization. And that's you put the three of those together, and that's dynamite. I mean, that's a jetpack for your organization, and how you can really ignite growth behind it in a way that doing the same thing over and over again is not going to achieve. So if it's an individual who says, I think I'm stuck, my business isn't moving the way I want to, one of your considerations should be, what role does my brand play in that? And if I'm going to make some changes to my organization, does changing the brand too and rolling it all under a rebranding initiative achieve the kind of results that I'm wanting to get toward? And you should have very clear metrics as to what you're going to measure against in terms of pre and post rebranding, so that you can truly say the dollars contributed to that the effort was worth it.
You're listening to Small Business Pivots. This podcast is produced by my company, Boss. Our business is helping yours grow. Boss offers business loans with business coaching support. Apply in minutes and get approved and funded in as little as 24 to 48 hours at businessownershipsimplified.com. If you're enjoying this podcast, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and share it as well. Now let's get back to our special guest. I know a lot of listeners may not be in the position to afford or invest in a true rebrand. So what are some things they can be doing to get to that point? In other words, how can they improve their brand, kind of like DIY, do it yourself, until they can afford it? What are some best practices that most businesses should at least follow on their brand that they currently have?
Well, and I think, you always want to be on top of what your brand is doing for your organization. So you want to make sure that you are measuring and have keen line of sight into whether the brand is working as hard as it should for you. And that's conversations that you're having with clients, with customers, where you see how you're perceived, in the marketplace by the people that are doing business with you, and then the people that aren't doing business with you, and why. Why are they choosing a competitor, over you? And that can be done anecdotally. That can be, you equip your sales team to ask the right questions to be able to understand those kind of dynamics, and you bring it back together and and collectively look at it and study, what is our brand to people out there? It's not, we know what we're trying to convey, but what are they perceiving of our brand? How are they processing our brand? And is it something we need to tinker with? And that tinkering then can be a brand refresh. It can be just, it could be a new logo, a new tagline, an update of your website that reflects what you've learned in terms of trying to make sure that people are understanding what you want them to. So, there could be a gap between how you're perceived and what you're wanting to be perceived as, and what can you do to get closer to that perceived as. That's all should be normal course of business, for any organization, because you can be working your tail off and think you're doing all the right things. And if you only to find out that your brand and the way you're perceived out in the marketplace is not what you wanted, and that's why you're banging your head against the wall, because you think you're here, and in reality, people view you down here, and you got to close that gap. So that's a lot of the DIY work that you should kind of be doing on an ongoing basis before you decide that you need a bigger change, like a repositioning or even something as aggressive as a rebrand.
I know some of the frustration for business owners are going from agency to agency and getting two completely different views. What does a business owner do in those situations? Because I've been with some business owners and they feel like, well, that's just subjective. That's just their opinion. What makes your process different to where it's not an opinion, it's not subjective, it's here's some facts?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I think, realize that when if you have a sore back and you go to a surgeon for, there's, saying, I have a sore back, what are the things that we can do? Well, their solution is surgery. Right. So if you go to a firm that and you say, I'm having, trouble with my brand that's not keeping up. Well, their solution is going to be, let's do it. You got to do this. You got to go, do that. At the end of the day, it's the research, it's the perceptions that tell you what it is that you need to do and what you're allowed to do in your customers' minds. And so I'll use it as an example. We will do in any exercise that we go through, whether we do a lot of detailed research or not, we will always say, give us a list of 10 of your customers. We want to talk to them one-on-one and explore, what do they think of your brand today? What do they think of your reputation? And what do they think are the areas that you're allowed to grow into and why? And I'll never forget this. One client we did, it was based out of Boston. It was they were in the construction industry, but what they did is provided the window treatments and acoustical panels and some of those kind of products for new buildings that were being constructed. And they were wanting to get out of the place of being an order taker for, just send me 10 new blinds, to somebody that would come in and evaluate and say, okay, the way you built this building, you got 18 hours of sunshine coming in here, and your employees are going to be cooking because they're going to be in direct sunlight all day long. So you need blinds that are going to, have this kind of, shading, and if they're on automatic, they're going to come down when the sun comes up. There are all sorts of solutions. So much more of a consultative kind of provider to those building construction companies than just ordering, fulfilling an order for 10 blinds. And so when we talked to their customers and said, how do they compare against other people that you might order 10 blinds for? They said, they've got a showroom that I can go in and see these things. They've got people who are, experts in engineering and can have a conversation with me about this and help me make the right decisions. And so he went back to the client and said, you have a wide open door here. You have already earned the place in customers' minds to be more of a consultant to them. You're already kind of doing it. Now you need to say it more, and you need to show the proof of what that outcome will be so that those clients and other ones in the future can see the true value in it. So only by having those kind of conversations did we say, let's go, this is going to work, it's going to be terrific. And then design the new brand that delivered on that kind of promise. So it wasn't like creating a promise that was real blue sky. It was a promise that customers already knew they could deliver upon because of the work that they had done with them in the past. That's the goal of being in understanding what the customer thinks before you get too far into this process.
That's a great answer, because I think that answers a lot of questions. And if our listeners didn't pick up on this, is this fair to say? If someone just takes your brand and runs with it, that's probably a red flag. That's why it's subjective. But if they do research first, communicate with your clients and your perceived perception in the public, that's factual, right? Is that kind of what you're saying?
And talk to the sales team, because the sales team is, they're on the front line of working with customers, and they're the ones that are prospecting and calling that, cold calling somebody. What are you hearing about how people perceive the company and their willingness to do work with us? Talk to the client service people to say, what are the challenges you run into? And do your customers feel that you are resolving those challenges in a timely manner? And what are they asking you to do that you can't do? Because that's, in a sense, they're saying, I would be willing to let you do this if you had the product, if you had the service for it. So what are they asking you for that you're saying, I'm sorry, we can't do that? So there's a lot of that kind of insight that you can gain in a very qualitative kind of standpoint to really inform what your brand is, what elasticity does it have, and what kind of solution you need. Somebody that comes flying in from the outside and throws pretty new logos and colors up and says, this is what you need to do, without that kind of grounding and insight, is they're going right to surgery when you might not need it.
Right, when they may not need it. And I will share, for because I've experienced this with clients as well. When they go to an agency, I'm calling them agencies, but that could be a marketing firm, it could be an ad agency, whatever it is.
Mhm.
If they're going there, I assure you, if they make a promise, a bold promise, go somewhere else. Because don't think that a branding, you can't control the markets, you can't control customers, you're just going by facts. I'm not a branding expert like yourself, but I know from our clients we've worked alongside with an agency with them, the ones that make the bold promises are the ones that get the worst outcome or the worst
Okay.
product
Yeah.
in return. It could be everything from, we can get you 10,000 more views on YouTube. How can you guarantee that? Because you can't, not the right views anyways. So I just throw that in because that's what I've seen with some of our business owners we work with.
And I'll share this. It sounds like you could have a lot of entrepreneurs with great ideas and businesses that they're wanting to stand up. And we did this 8 years ago when we launched Rebranding Experts, and we had done a few rebrandings previously with another agency that I own, and we did a really good job with them. But I said to myself, "Whoa, let's define the whole methodology that an organization should go through here and have it step by step in a very detailed project management plan and make sure that every question that needs to be asked in a rebranding exercise is built into that process so that you don't get through it and find out, oops, we should have done this, we should have done that. We overguessed, we overestimated what could happen here, and built out that whole methodology. We did research among companies that had rebranded, not clients of ours, but companies that we identified and reached out to them and said, would you be willing to, participate in a research effort to say, what were the challenges that you faced? What were the things that you didn't expect that emerged? And took all those learnings and built it into our methodology so that when we launched the agency, we could say this is based, our approach is based upon what rebranded organizations have gone through. It's not what we're telling you need to do in this bold new brand. It's really based upon the experience that companies have had. And they've told us, one of the things that was very clear is the internal side of rebranding is much harder than the external side. So coming up with that new experience that you're going to deliver to customers, defining what process procedures are going to need to be updated, how your employees are going to be trained to do that differently, how your leadership is going to be the cheerleaders that they need to be to encourage employees to deliver against that new promise, to inspire them to be a part of all this before you ever launch, is more important than what the externally people are going to be seeing. And that's where you see a lot of organizations that will rebrand, and it's kind of like frosting on the cake. It's not, all they're doing is making the product look a little bit better and something that might engage more customers. But then when you go back and you buy the product, it's the same old company that it used to be.
Yeah.
They haven't done anything differently. And that's where you get the disappointment then in the rebranding, because they're like, oh yeah, they just put some lipstick on the pig.
Yeah.
They didn't really actually change themselves. They're not delivering on a promise to me that's different than the past. So if you're starting a new business, if you're early in those first years, is make sure that the way you have built your process is different than what anybody else is offering out in the marketplace. And you're more likely to get the customer you want then, because they're going to perceive you as being much more knowledgeable, much more trustworthy in the whole process, because it's not just your opinion on what you need to do, but it's a whole, kind of different framework of looking at that problem and solving it.
You mentioned about 18 months for I don't know, the research,
Yeah.
which to me, it
Which
does
was
not sound.
the whole exercise. Yeah. To
Yeah.
get through the whole
And that doesn't sound very long to me, but as a coach, I know how long it takes to transform a business. But so branding, if you do it properly, you're looking at it about 18 months. What's the time frame afterwards? So if the rebranding is done right and well, 6 months, 9 months, because we have a new brand here. So
Right.
just because we have a new brand doesn't mean everybody's going to
They're not
catch
going to
on
come running.
right away. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not going to come running to it. You're going to spend 6 to 12 months after it, making sure people know that you've changed the brand. And because people, the essence of communications is repetition. So you just got to keep repeating it. We are now, such and such a company, and for 12 months you're going to have on your website, when people go to the website, you're going to want to make sure that there's a little disclaimer there saying, formally such and such, so that people say, oh, that's right, it changed. That's, these are the good people I liked, and they changed their name. So, and you have to aggressively tell them and show them through your actions what that new brand stands for, and bring it to life. And day one, so a perfect example is, we worked with a credit union in the Southwest. Credit unions have always been named after the employer group that they originated against, and those are really old and stale sounding now, and they feel very exclusive to anybody else wanting to do business with them. So, if you're under the name of General Motors Credit Union, well, if you don't work for General Motors, you're not going to go to that credit union. So a lot of credit unions are needing to rebrand themselves right now to be able to be relative to a much larger customer segment. So in this case, we said day one, when somebody walks in, after you put up a new sign and you've told everybody through your media announcement and your advertising and your billboards going up around town that you are now this new organization. When they walk in the door, something better be different.
Yeah.
They better be greeted differently. There needs to be, a new experience that they're going to have, the language with which your people are talking to them, or they're going to say, "Oh, that's really fancy on the outside, but the inside's still the same." And I don't feel any different. So, what new programs or services you're going to offer. In this particular case, they had a reward program that they offered to their long-standing original members to make them feel more special, and on a little bit higher of a pedestal, because they were there from the start. And then you could go out and also market to new customers, and you had to make sure that it was positioned as to why are we no longer what we used to be? Why are we better for you as an option here? So it's a very complex effort,
Yeah.
and it requires a lot of leadership across the organization being included in changing it, transforming the organization to meet the new brand.
Yeah, that's one of the areas. This is a subjective opinion, but it's one of those areas I would not go with my gut on a rebrand. I would go with the market research, because you can really do a lot of damage if you go at it alone and don't know what you're doing, and go with your gut versus market research and doing this comprehensive stuff that you're talking about. Is there anything that I haven't asked that you're like, I know from time to time when I'm on a podcast, I'm like, oh, I wish I'd really like to talk about this because this part is so important. Is there anything like that I haven't covered here?
One thing I think would be important is to realize is, if you're a smaller business, this is actually an easier process. Rebranding an airline is a monumental effort, because you got to paint planes with your new logo, and you have to change gate signage and all sorts of different stuff. If you're a smaller business, it's going to be easier for you to go through this process, because you know who your customer base is. You can communicate directly to them. The prospects that you're going after. You can easily communicate to them. You're going to have less what we call branded assets, like signage and materials and so forth, that you have to spend money updating. So you're able to be a little bit more nimble, in making the change. And that's why I always encourage, entrepreneurs is, if you're starting a business for the first time, spend time getting the brand right from the beginning, so that you don't find yourself needing to rebrand very soon down the road. And if you are a smaller business and you've been in business for a while, and you realize, I didn't spend as much time working on the brand from the beginning as I did setting up the operations and so forth, you're still in a good place to take advantage of a brand refresh, a repositioning, or an entire rebrand, because it's a less complicated kind of environment with which to execute that. Entrepreneurs always fall into a few buckets. They name the business after themselves, And then they're having good success and they're like starting to think of an exit strategy and they realize their brand is tethered to them. And all of a sudden you're like, okay, this is going to be a heavier lift than I thought because if I'm going to sell my business someday and I'm not going to be a part of it, this name isn't going to work anymore. So solve that for a potential buyer in the future so that it doesn't become their problem to deal with. So, and we're seeing a lot of like dental practices right now that used to be, Dr. Bruce Ogeson was the, dentist as a child I used to go to. And now they're more corporate businesses that own several practices and they're branding themselves like magnificent smiles or bright smiles or things like that. They're focusing on the outcome of what you will get from an experience with them, having a terrific set of choppers and a great smile, as opposed to the person who does it. And so that's a good example in a smaller business environment, professional services, how get ahead and brand on the outcome of doing work with you as opposed to you the person that's doing the work.
Not to jump on top of that, but I do have an area of business. If you're considering a business and for some reason the company name takes them forever because they're trying to be too creative, if you mow lawns, start with residential lawn mowing. Like people will at least know what you do,
Yeah.
Versus green skies, plateaus or something, I don't, I see that all the time. And then they wonder why no one calls them. It's like, cause they don't know what you do.
Yeah.
And most people won't ask. So,
yeah. And we get a lot of businesses where, in that exact kind of thing, they started out, this is a very common one, in some kind of home repair. So maybe they did plumbing. And then they added electrical, and then they added, HVAC and so forth. But their brand is still associated with plumbing.
Yeah.
And they're like, how do we get out of this now? Because they're not giving us the chance because they perceive us as as just doing plumbing. And that's a rebrand then, where your services have broadened, your brand needs to broaden out, and you need to go through the study of what's the best way to do that.
That's a great example. Thanks for sharing.
See a lot of those.
I know a lot of listeners are probably just like, how do I learn more? What's the best way to find you on the internet, social media, all those channels?
So rebrandingexperts.com, and we have it loaded with a lot of resources. Stories that I write for Forbes, you can find on there, videos, that kind of dive into the process and so forth. And then you can follow me on LinkedIn, Jim Heininger. You can follow the business on LinkedIn, Rebranding Experts. Probably the most active social channel we're on, but certainly there for, Facebook, Instagram as well, too.
Okay, great. Fantastic. Well, I always end with a general question. If you were in front of an audience of small business owners, different sizes, different industries, what's one thing that's applicable to all of them? It could be an insight, a quote, a book, anything that kind of helps them have a voice of hope.
Well, I'm always going to bring it back to, is keep attention on your brand, and don't be afraid if your brand isn't right to make changes to it. It seems like such a sacrificial cow to some people. It's, I can't touch that. I can't do that. Sure you can.
Yeah.
So be the business problem solver that you set yourself up to be, and make sure that that's something you keep an eye on and that it's working as absolutely hard as it can for your business.
Are you open to questions if anybody has any to
Absolutely. Yeah.
reach out to you?
Yeah, and you can email me at jim@rebrandingexperts.com. Happy to respond.
Fantastic. Well, I encourage our listeners to do just that, because branding either creates business or loses business, in my opinion. So, Jim, I appreciate it. You've been a wealth of information and a blessing to many. Thank you for listening to Small Business Pivots. This podcast is created and produced by my company, Boss. Our business is growing yours. Boss offers flexible business loans with business coaching support. Apply in minutes and get approved and funded in as little as 24 to 48 hours at businessownershipsimplified.com. If you're enjoying this podcast, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and share it as well. If you need help growing your business, email me at michael@michaeldmorrison.com. We'll see you next time on Small Business Pivots.